friends, how's it going? It's me, Betty Jean. We are finally wrapping up my top 10 series for this year. I've been doing this top 10 series the last few years now, and I'm finally bringing this series to a close. In this series, I went over my top 10 favorite blushes, highlighters, lip glosses, lipsticks, liquid lipsticks, single shadows. We are finishing it off today with my top 10 favorite eyeshadow palettes. I'm so excited. I love eyeshadow. It's like my favorite part of makeup, and I'm really excited to share my top 10 with you. As I've mentioned before in the other parts of this series, there are some aspects of my makeup collection that I didn't do a top 10 on, like foundations, bronzers, powders, concealers, things like that, because I either simply don't have a top 10 or maybe I just don't even have 10 total. I recommend, if you're interested in the other aspects of my collection that I didn't go over in this series, check out my makeup collection and declutter series. The most recent one is at the end of 2021, and I'll be revamping it again at the end of this year. I am so curious to hear what you think are in my top 10. I think some of my ranking today might surprise some of you. Some of the things that have been like tried and trues aren't as much anymore, and there's some new things in here as well. Some long-term old favorites. There's a lot of good palettes in here, and I'm really excited to share them with you. I would also love to hear your favorite palettes, whether you have a top 10 or you just want to share a couple favorites. Please leave them down below. Before we get into it, I did of course film this look. It should already be up on my Instagram and TikTok by the time this video goes up. And as far as my accessories go, these earrings are from 5 Lemons and this choker is from Shop Sun & Co. Anyways, without further ado, let's just hop in and chat about my top 10 favorite eyeshadow palettes. All right, my friends, we are officially finishing off this series. We are finally on eyeshadow palettes, and I am so excited. I love these palettes with my entire heart. A good majority of these have been in favorites videos in the past, and a lot of them have continued to stay. But I will say, a lot of things have moved around. Things that you might think are number one are not number one anymore. And some things that used to be number one years ago are actually towards the bottom. So we're just gonna get into it, but I did want to kick it off with my honorable mention, which is my collab palette with Shroud, my It's Freaking Bats palette. Obviously, it goes without saying that this is my favorite palette in my whole collection. It is so beat up. Honestly, I feel like it would look more beat up, but I actually have 2 palettes that I jump between, and I have my old singles, so just depending on what's nearest to me is what I either take traveling or what I use when I feel like it. This is forever and always my favorite palette in my whole collection, but I feel like it wouldn't have been a very good video if this was the like drum roll please. That would have been so obvious. So I did just want to shout my girl out here. She is wonderful and amazing. At the moment that I'm filming this, there are still some palettes in stock, and it will continue to restock until further notice, just as long as people want it. I absolutely love seeing your looks, and I love that so many of you love this palette. It makes my heart so happy. I'm so proud of this, and this is for sure my #1 favorite, but we're just gonna call it my honorable mention for the purposes of this video so I can give the #1 slot to something else that isn't my own. Kicking it off with number 10. Are you shocked right now? Number 10 is my Ace Beauté Flare palette. If you know, you know. This was my favorite palette for like a few years running. It was my #1, and the fact that it's already been knocked all the way down to 10 is crazy. Like, the idea that this might be pushed out of the top 10 at some point is wild to me. I love and have loved this palette for years. I've loved this palette even since before Ace Beauté improved their formula. This is still my OG one. I personally never had a problem with their formula, but I do really enjoy their new one as well. I just think this is such a fun combination of grungy, colorful. I really love all the rich mattes in here. It's bright, but also jewel toned. It is such a beautiful palette, and I still super love this one. It holds such a special place in my heart. I can't see myself ever getting rid of this. It's just such a fantastic one. Number 9 is my Fantasy Cosmetica Druid palette. I just got this year. It's from a new indie brand. They wanted to send it out to me, and I was really excited to try their first product, and it honestly just blew my mind. It's been my favorite palette I've tried this year so far, and I'm just so impressed with it. The mattes are so rich and deep and amazing, and the shimmers are so special. It's really hard to capture this palette on camera because it's so shiny, but this palette truly just blew me away. I didn't expect it to necessarily be in my top 10 out of all of my palettes, but lo and behold, as I was going through all my palettes, this one I just kept going back to. So yeah, this is ranked number 9. It's a beautiful formula, super easy to work with, and the shimmers are so good and so reflective. I love this one. I'm really happy to see this one here. I'm also really excited to see what else this brand releases. I am super pumped for it. Number 8 is my Ace Beauté Tropical Vibes palette, and it's really funny that there are 2 Ace Beauté palettes in this because I wouldn't necessarily consider them like my favorite eyeshadow brand. Like, I really like their eyeshadows, but I wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, Ace Beauté, my #1 favorite eyeshadow formula. At this moment, don't ask me to tell you my #1 favorite eyeshadow formula. I have so many favorites, it's hard to pick. Probably Blend Bunny at the moment. Also love Shroud, I love Oden's Eye, I love Mel. I have a lot of favorites. I can't pick just one. But it's funny that 2 Ace Beauté ones ended up in here. It's just because they happen to have color stories that I just absolutely adore. This Tropical Vibes palette is amazing. This is with their newer formula and it's just so good. These murky greens get my heart going. They are so pretty and swampy and grungy and everything good in the world. I love all of these mattes. They are so easy to work with and the shimmers are super pretty. If I had to critique this at all, I would maybe replace like one of the grungy greens with like a grungy green shimmer because we didn't really get that. Like we have kind of this like light olivey golden color and then more of like a bronzy golden green, but I want like a true swampy green shimmer. But other than that, I love this palette. I think it is so much fun to work with. I feel like you can do things that are very bright but also very muted and it's just such a blast. I love this one. Number 7 is my Oden's Eye and Annette's Makeup Corner collab, the Giant Wolves palette. I love this one. And spoiler alert, this is the only other collab besides my own in this video. So I guess besides my own, this is my favorite collab in my collection. So congrats, Annette. She just killed this palette. It is so good. It's not in stock anymore. It was limited edition and it is gone now. So I'm so sorry. There are a couple palettes in this video that aren't available anymore and I so deeply apologize, but maybe if you have this floating around in your collection, it'll re-inspire you to play with it. But I love this. She killed it. Grungy tones, rich, deep jewel tones. I love, love, love the shimmers in here. It is so much fun to play with and I'm just so incredibly happy for her and I'm in love with this collab and I knew immediately this was gonna be in my top 10 because it's just such a good theme and such a good color story. What a fun palette to play with. And number 6, rounding out the bottom 5 of my top 10 in my whole collection is my Give Me Glow Bad Witch Club palette. Mine is very beat up, as you will see. 1, I've used this a lot, and 2, I've dropped it a couple of times, but I've managed to keep it together enough. I love this palette. I fell in love with it when the pictures got released. It's just so, so beautiful. I love Give Me Glow's formula. I find the mattes to be so creamy and blendable and so insanely pigmented, and the shimmers are just so rich. They're not necessarily sparkly in this palette, but they're just very rich and opaque and metallic and amazing, and I love it. This is such a fun one to work with. I love the different tones in here. It is absolutely gorgeous and I just love it. It's such a good one. Ooh, moving on to the top 5 in my whole collection. This is so exciting. Number 5 is my Beauty Bay Wilderness palette. I think this is one of those palettes that isn't available anymore. I really hope they bring this one back because it is so good. This was actually my first time trying Beauty Bay's eyeshadow formula and I fell in love with it. This palette is amazing. I love the mixture of, again, the swampy tones, the jewel tones, the brightness. There's a very common theme with my favorite palettes in this video, I feel like. I know what I like. What can I say? The shimmers in here are so rich and so amazing and I love the color combos you can do with this. You can do something kind of earthy, you can do something a little more bright. Oh, it's so much fun. This is a really good go-to if I'm gonna travel because it has a lot of the things that I would possibly need and it's just such a good one. I'm so glad I treated myself to this and introduced myself to this brand's eyeshadow formula because now I just know how much I love it and I'm just so happy I own this one. This became a favorite so fast. I think it only took me like playing with it once or twice for me to be like, okay, yeah, this is a favorite for sure. Honestly, with all of these, it really doesn't take me too long to make up my mind on an eyeshadow palette because I've played with eyeshadow for so long in my days now. But yeah, love this one. Such a good one. Moving on to number 4, an all-time long-term favorite. I have eyeshadow all over my hands now, go figure. This is the Gemini palette from Melt Cosmetics. This was actually a gift long ago, and I'm so happy that I own this because it truly opened up my love for Melt Cosmetics. I remember wanting this so bad when it first released, but there were multiple things many years ago that were coming out and I could only buy so much. So I ended up passing on this one. I'm just so grateful to this day that I ended up getting this as a gift down the road because It's one of my favorite palettes in my whole collection. It is number 4. Again, the swampy, grungy tones. It's just so amazing. I personally really like Melt's formula. I've personally never met a Melt palette that I don't like, and I just think this one's wonderful. This would be like probably my go-to neutral palette if I wanted to do something kind of neutral, but not like neutral. Obviously, it's still colors. This is what I would gravitate towards every single time. It's always one of my absolute favorites during the fall season. It's just, it's a true treasure in my collection. Oh my gosh, moving on to my top 3. Oh goodness. Number 3 is my Melt Cosmetics Muerte palette. I'm sure everybody knew this would be in this video because I've been raving about this for years. This is another one that is sadly no longer available, but I've heard rumors that they're supposedly bringing it back, but who knows if that's true. Gossip is gossip at the end of the day. But it's amazing and wonderful. I love this with my whole heart. I just love how rich but vibrant it is. It's so cool. I love the kind of berry, turquoise, blue, red color story. It's so unique and so much fun. I just love this one. And it's funny, this was actually tied for first place with my Flare palette for a couple years, and then this one ended up kind of staying a little bit higher than the Flare for a minute. Now this one's gotten knocked down a couple pegs. It's just so wild, but yeah, I love this palette. Usually I like a little bit more shimmers, but I'm really not mad at this ratio either because I think it's just so pretty and these mattes are so rich and delicious to work with. I really hope they bring this one back at some point because I know so many people still really want it. This is such a good one. Moving on to number 2. Number 2 is my Kaleidos Flower Punk palette. Did any of you expect this to not be number 1? This was my number 1 favorite palette last year, and it became my number 1 favorite palette in my collection. This was ranked number 1 in last year's top 10, and it was number 1 in my ranking my palettes I tried in 2021 video. But I love this one. This was like the most exciting release last year for me. It's just so pretty. I love this whole collection. I love the whole vibe. This is just such a fun color story. The dusty roses with the grungy like olive chartreusey tones with the pops of turquoise. How freaking cool. So fun. It's like grungy spring and I absolutely love it. I love Kaleidos formula. And this is hands down my favorite palette they've ever done. I will say though, I miss their 6-pan Futurism palette so much. I want them to do another collection with those so bad, but this palette is killer. I absolutely love it. So happy that it exists, and I'm so happy to say that it's in my top 10. It's crazy that it's not number 1 anymore, but I think when I show you number 1, you will totally understand. And finally, drumroll please for my number 1 favorite palette in my whole collection. I ended up having to give it to my Blend Bunny Cosmetics Surge palette. For those of you who know, I love this palette so much. This was such a hit for me last year. Even though I didn't rank it number 1 last year, I've just since decided that besides my own personal collab palette, this just is my favorite palette in my collection. It is pretty massive with 30 shades, and I don't usually gravitate towards large palettes, but they did this palette so well. Even though there's 30 shades, there is so much uniqueness in it, and everything is different, and there is such a good gradient. We have just our different rows of like green, blue, purple, so on and so forth. And then going horizontally, we have like our lights, our midtones, our deeps, our shimmers, and then our pops of neon at the bottom, and they are some awesome neons to work with. Neons are not always easy. The super dark row is also amazing. It's just such a good, colorful palette. It's like grungy rainbow, and I live for it. It is such a good one. This was my first time trying this brand, and I immediately fell in love with the formula and totally understood the hype from the Blends palette, and now I can happily say that I have both the Blends and the Dollhouse palettes, and I am so anxiously awaiting whatever she releases next because she killed it. Her matte formula is amazing. Her shimmers are wonderful as well. And this palette just makes me really happy. It's a good go-to when I'm traveling, and yeah, this is my current favorite palette in my collection, again, aside from my own collab. Oh, and I think that wraps it up. I have eyeshadow all over me. I need to clean up my mess. Let's zoom out and finish up this video. All right, my friends, that wraps it up for this top 10 series. I hope you enjoyed my video chatting about my top 10 favorite eyeshadow palettes. I would love to hear again what your favorites are. I would also love to hear your thoughts on the palettes I mentioned today. Do you have any of them? Do you want any of them? Let's chat down below. If you made it to the end of this video, you know what? Just leave me your top 10 favorite emojis. I feel like that's a good place to leave it off on. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps my channel out a lot. And if you're not already, you can follow me on my other socials. You can join the battybean fam. I am battybean on everything, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And if you want, you can subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. I'm posting most days over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Okay, bye. As I've said in all the other videos in this series, as I've mentioned in I literally cannot get a word out today. Nothing is coming out of my brain correctly. Even though these lipsticks don't move, I'm always scared of getting it on my teeth, especially with a color like this. It's very, very blue. I don't need that all over my teeth. Thank you very much.